Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Anthony Losacco. He is an author and also an IT professional. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you for having me, AJ.
You are welcome to the show. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure a lot of people, not just in India, but across the world, will learn a bit about what we are going to discuss about. It's something very important. We'll talk about the future of family, how different family systems are under attack, how we can do what we can do about family. So my first question to you, Tony, is to understand, why do you talk about family system? You are an IT professional. How have you come about talking about family? It is a matter of concern how families are getting evolved or destroyed, if we may use the word right now. But I'll come to that destroy part later on also. I want to understand first, how did you get into this sort of discussion about families?
So, interestingly enough, I think I just sort of fell into it, and it's really a process of my life. And I would say you reflect more on these things when you start having children. You also reflect more as your parents age. But the philosophies and the ideas that I wrote down, and it was during COVID that I wrote this book, but have really been things that I've been talking about with either my wife or close friends, or that just have come about. And very simply, when my parents were divorced, I was 13. Actually, they did the separation, and which ultimately means divorce. Sorry about that. I thought I turned that off. And I was one of maybe two kids in my entire high school that had that experience. And what I always say now with my kids growing up is, when they entered high school, they were one of two kids that had parents who were still together. And it's a striking phenomena to me, and I apologize, I'm just making sure I'm silent, that nobody cares. And more importantly, and especially in America and Western societies, it's almost being frowned upon, and meaning the family and staying together and working through hardships and raising your children to be good people and good members of society, productive members of society. And it's amazing to me that we have become, and this is just my belief from definitely Western societies, and I would love your perspective on Eastern societies, because they're very different, but that it's become even more than apathetic and frowned upon to have a family, to love someone for your whole life, to work through your troubles versus allowing them to separate you. And then worse, thinking that it's perfectly acceptable after you destroy something that your kids only knew to then leave, and worse, potentially create new families, which only creates more destruction for more people. So that's kind of a long way of answering your question. I apologize.
No, no, not at all. It is perfectly, you brought things in perspective. Now, I want to understand, when you talked about the Western society, the Eastern society, both Western society and Eastern society have been, there for all these things have evolved over a period of time. And with modernization, with modern understanding, different way of job, technology, things have evolved in different manner. There have been more understanding about other societies as we have got more tools and technology, especially in the last several years. But in the Western world, when this has been the norm for so many
I agree.
decades, then what is it that has suddenly happened that is of concern? Why is it, even in India, in the Eastern, if I talk about India, uh, there is a bit of an impact of these things, either Hollywood, Western understanding, but but by and large, if you still, that they say that Indians carry their culture along. What they mean many a times is about the family system also. We will come to that, but first I want to understand about that, where is it that the tectonic scale shift actually happened towards negative, because this system has been there for long, or is it that this was a recent phenomena when individualism is almost celebrated? Kids move out, at 18 years of age. People find, we as Indians will find it a bit very difficult to digest. A person like me who has been in cities, study, now we know a bit more, so we are able to understand it a bit more. But for somebody who is in the rural areas, we will find it very almost shocking that the kid has to move out of parents' house, and it is a negative thing to be staying with your parents. In India, it is a positive thing. If you move out of your house, there will be a whole lot of questions from everyone. Even the landlord will ask, why is this guy at 18 years moving out from his house? Until unless you have a reason to go out of city for some job or something else.
It's funny, and I've never thought about it that way. I think we overlap in one area, and I write about this as well. Is My grandparents lived with us when we were older, and they were both Italian, and they were definitely from a different culture, but they were, I think when people come to America, or at least when they used to come to America, they did one of two things. They either chose heavy assimilation, like my grandparents did. They didn't teach my father Italian, which meant it didn't carry down to us, which I think is tragic in its own way. Or they kind of practiced their own culture within the four walls of their house and kind of maintain that. Um, I think when you look at it and go, if you look at a large part of America being created by Europeans and the like, family was a little different, but not very far off from what you're talking about. It was very common for families to live together, and oddly enough, I don't know when that changed. Like I said, the having my grandparents live with us was an amazing thing for me growing up as a child, because it brought something else to our family, a different perspective, a different age. Elders now, if you look at that, are also destroyed and destroying themselves. But I would just pivot slightly on that context and go, why does a child leave at 18? Um, I think it's more of a rite of passage into adulthood. I write in here that children are not adults and adults are not children. And there's been in the West an infantilization of adult children, that it's okay to live with your parents till you're 30. And where I think the difference comes maybe is, before it was go off and live your life, and I'm always here for you as a backdrop to support you. But part of growing up is going off on your own and starting your own family, and getting a job, and joining society. But when you say that, Indians kind of look at that and go, what are you doing? And that's weird. I think when they stay home, it's different than the way kids are staying home now over the last 20 years. They're probably productive. They probably have jobs. They probably are supporting their parents and or assisting financially or otherwise, whereas they're not just a slug living off their parents, living in the basement, watching pornography on the internet, and staring into this 25 hours out of a 24-hour day, and just decaying their brain. So that's where I think the difference might lie. But the challenge was always like I always say this with boys. Boys need to grow up, and the only way you can have boys grow up is to kick their asses out of the house, because at some point in time, children challenge their parents and question whatever they've been taught as right, wrong, or otherwise. And the best way to experience those lessons is through the lens of life. So
Absolutely.
that's sort of the dichotomy, at least from my perspective.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So all societies have found the best way for themselves, and they've tried to move forward. And then, with modern changes, all these new challenges have come up. And one has to deal with things in the backdrop of how different cultures, different societies are, rather than, and perhaps going forward, one can find one good thing from one another and see if they can uh, add to that whole atmosphere. Like as you said, that Europeans, when they were in the US, then Europe is quite traditional in several
Oh,
sense,
yeah.
isn't it? In the US it came out very differently. Even if you are from an Italian background, so from in that perspective, even in Italy, family, even in those movies, they show it, that it's a family, whether in a
Yeah.
negative, but that
Even
that
if
that
they're criminals. Yeah.
but the emphasis is always that family is family, and that shows that there was that sense. So I want to understand, then you also talk about, now let's talk about the destroying of the family. You say that there are people who are those who are actively trying to destroy the family. Who is this segment? Is it the market?
Ugh.
Is it the industry which is benefiting out of it? Every new family creates a whole lot of things. The renting class, if you go out, you have to rent. There are people who are renting so much of property. It works for the banks, and when you are young, you don't have that much of great understanding of money management. Credit card in your pocket, it's a big business for so many people out there.
Well, and that's where I also attribute, uh, you know, almost all of the ills of Western society can come back to the nuclear family and the destruction. But I also think when you look at bad kids, and I don't want to say bad as in, an evil kind of way, but maybe poorly socialized children, it's probably the result of bad parenting. And no one's given a parent's guide. There's definitely more. The reason I called this the analog parent is because I do think technology has something to do with it, in terms of rotting kids' brains. But I think the destruction of the family is twofold. I point to a specific generation, and it's my parents' generation, the what we call the boomers here. After World War II, the boom was a baby boom, and it was the result of all of the devastation in Europe and the tens of thousands of millions of people slaughtered uh, in that act. So the family kind of came back in this huge, huge way. But then you look at it culturally, and that group that was born of that didn't just rebel, they sort of changed the concept of family. And you can attribute that culturally to kind of like the hippie movement and whatnot. But it also, if you look at it from a corporate standpoint, there weren't global conglomerates back then. They started with that generation. Technology wasn't a thing back then, it started with that generation. The notion of feminism as it is today and back then started in that generation. So this attack on the family was both culturally, but then if you look at it and go politically and philosophically, and I, don't know how well read you are, but if you've read any Marxist trope, whether that's Karl himself or Lenin or Mein Kampf or even Socrates, or is it Socrates, the Republic? There's a belief system that generally thinks that the few smart people should control the massive stupid people. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to destroy the family. And it always starts with the family, always. And then the next thing they attack is religion. And, I was raised Catholic. I would say I'm not a practicing, I'm a heathen more than I am anything else, but I'm not an atheist. And that's probably due to my upbringing, but also just empirical evidence that every society since the beginning of time has thought of something greater than themselves. Those who don't want the family and don't want God are actively, in this country especially, actively destroying it. And that's through the university system. It's through media today. It's everywhere, and it's pervasive, and it's out in the open. And now when you look at throw in big tech on top of it, you have the essence of totalitarianism dressed up as capitalism. And, people keep forgetting capitalism isn't a thing. It wasn't born, this country wasn't founded on capitalism. It was founded on a representative republic, which most people don't know. There's been three since the beginning of time. One was almost wiped off the map by the Mongols it was Southeast Asia, and it's like I can't even say the name. Then Rome, then the United States. That's why we're such an anomaly. And the arrogance of the United States kind of brings in everything else. But as I point to people, name another country who gives more financially, both from a government and a humanitarian, just the people themselves. We're not perfect. We're the least perfect. However, the idea was in essence perfect. It tried to stop the few from controlling the many. And that all plays into the family. And now if you look at people today, kids today are being told, you live too long, you can't possibly be with the same person. No one can be, your one and only. If you have kids, you're killing the planet. All of these tropes that are out there without a shred of evidence supporting them. Because last I checked, the planet still exists, even though there are more people than there ever have been before. And the only people who actually espouse those beliefs are the ones gaining financially and from a power perspective. And that all gets crushed if the family becomes the identity. You mentioned individualism. It isn't individualism. I firmly believe in individualism. E pluribus unum means out of many one, or that is the statement on every bill that comes out of Treasury. And what that means is individuals who believe that they are able to govern themselves create a one unified America. America's lost its way. It's not even taught anymore. No one even knows. Here's what kids know today. The constitutional founders were all racists and slave owners. And that is such a black and white modern view of an era where they would be slave owners themselves. And it's so ignorant that it just defies belief. But what really has replaced individualism is identity. Where once your family was your identity, now you're brown, I'm olive. You call people white. And if you say, well, actually, I'm Italian and Polish, and you immediately get called racist for saying that. But if you're Hispanic, as every HR thing says now, it's like a big, hey, we got one. And religion is gone because that's evil. And you look at it and go, no wonder, sexuality is your identity. Since when? Who cares? And I put in the book, I grew up in the 80s and nobody cared. There wasn't, there were racists. The KKK hadn't existed for over 50 years before my lifetime. There wasn't any hatred. Openly homosexual people were out in public. If you looked at the popular culture, Whitney Houston, Prince, and Michael Jackson dominated. There were no the contrivances that people make today. And I even tell this to my kids, and then their response was, "Are you sure, Dad?" As if I didn't grow up and lived it. So I think there's a confluence of circumstances, but there's an active effort to say that the family isn't worth it anymore on lots of different levels.
Right, right, Tony. So I'm sure you have dealt with the solution. So what is the solution out of this? Is it can we reset it all, or is it too late for that?
I don't think it's too late. I am pessimistically optimistic, uh, if that's a possibility, because when you look at every great change ever, whatever that is, it usually started with a very, very small percentage of people. And that's what I think. That's why I write. It's going to take one family at a time. I want to change kids' belief that it's not worth it into it's worth it. And here's why. And here's the lies you've been told. And here's the things you have to worry about now if you aren't one of those that thinks against it but wants to have a family. You've got other challenges that I didn't have or just started to have with technology. There are so many things that are against it than for it, but that doesn't mean that, what was the line? You can blow out a candle, but you can't blow out a fire. That was Peter Gabriel on Stephen Biko being murdered in South Africa. And he's right. You can blow out a candle, but you cannot blow out a fire. And that's where I think if people start speaking positively about family, about having children, and not just having one. I mean, we're already facing it now. Asia's already well past the generational discrepancy. Japan is going to suffer. China is going to suffer. India is different because culturally, you're still breeding and you're still having children and you still believe in family. Here in America, you're running into that, like, we now have more old people than we do young people. And the younger people that are breeding aren't having 3 or 4 kids, they're having one. And that's the worst thing you can do. Only children. Both of my parents were only children, which is a very unique thing to say. And they had three. So I'm sure for watching 3 kids versus their singular existence had to be very odd for them. But that's what matters. So, no, I don't think it's the end. I think we can move forward. That's why I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate you have a much larger reach than I could ever have. And that's where you look at now, things are starting to change. You can't just call somebody a racist anymore. You actually might have to back it up with some facts. And, facts are those funny little things that get in the way of lies. And I believe the truth always comes out. It sometimes has to go through horrific things before that happens, but my hope is that we don't have to.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you. You see, earlier people used to stay in tribe, so that people could be with one another, so that they could be helpful to one another. They could feel human with that. And so you can keep one person out of the family, but you cannot keep the desire for family from that person.
I
That's the
agree.
way we are.
It's nature.
It's nature.
I
Nature.
agree.
So those people who are saying, for whatever reasons they are saying, I guess they need to understand more about nature, because nature has dealt with a lot of difficult circumstances. And if people act difficult, nature knows how to deal with such thoughts, such people. And time has shown it, history has shown it, and present will show it, and future is there. Well, with a lot of hope. That's what my understanding is.
Well, I hope when you and I are very old men, we can get back together, reflect upon this time, and look back and say, maybe in a super small way, we pushed the tide, or at least stood against it to have it keep eroding the shore, and that's why I wrote this book, and that's why I'm on this podcast, and that's what I want to do for the latter half of my life, if I can.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, what is the way people can learn more about you, Tony, more from your books? You have written several books, if I understand.
I have
This
written
one is
six
your
books.
sixth book. Yeah. So,
Correct.
tell us about that, the audience, so that they can make the
Sure.
best of you and your writing.
Shameless plug. There it is. The Analog Parent. The website will be up, which will just have the links to Amazon, where you can find it and purchase, or Barnes and Noble, where you can find it and purchase. But the analogparent.com or the analog parent on a search of Amazon will find it for you. And you don't have to believe it. I think I've made some well stated arguments, and everything's referenceable, which I believe in. And some of it is spiritual and philosophical, but not without, historical relevance. The adages of the times still apply. Life is not fair. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The spare the rod, spoil the child. All of these things still apply. We've just forgotten. That's
Wonderful.
it.
With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Oh, AJ, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Same here.